Good afternoon, everybody. It's a very great honor for me to be standing up in front of you. I'm Paul Cherry. I'm one of the Groundswell hosts and directors. I introduce very few of the sessions these days, which is a shame, but this is really special for many reasons. One is that the whole thing about Groundswell is collaboration, and there's no better collaboration, I think, than our collaboration with Leaf. There's so much linking everything that we understand with what you guys are doing. So, so I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to say a massive welcome to Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, and I'm now going to hand over to Philip Wynn.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for your very kind introduction, and a very warm welcome, Your Royal Highness. It's lovely to see you here. I know the subject that we're going to talk about this afternoon, about inspiring young people, is a one that's very close to your heart, so I hope you enjoy it. Before I ask our panelists to join me on the stage, I just want to set the scene and give you some insight as to the teenager research that Leaf has carried out over the last 6 years. And that research has involved over 2,500 young people. It's happened in school, it's happened on farm and Eldon Estate in Suffolk, and it's happened at Harper Adams. The aim of the research was to understand what young people believe and are motivated by across several themes, two of which are really pertinent for this afternoon: sustainable farming and careers. What I want to tell you first of all is that research findings were overall overwhelmingly positive. But the problem is, those that were involved in the project and research had little or no understanding of our agri-food industry and felt disconnected from how their food is produced and where in fact it comes from. What is clear is that they deeply care about how food is produced. They care about the issues of climate change and sustainability. And they also care and understand that farmers and food producers have a really important role in dealing with the challenge of climate change. And I think essentially young people are really interested to learn more about our industry. They want to be empowered to make more informed decisions. And so this research has been incredibly important in giving them a voice. And I think, Your Royal Highness, the very first time you came out onto farm, you said you must ask the young people, and we have. Importantly, most young people make their decisions about their careers and the next steps between the ages of 16 and 17. But 94% of them don't have a good understanding of what a career in our industry could look like. What roles exist? What career progression is available? 69% don't know how their school subjects could link in to the diversity of all the things that we do in our industry. And over half of them don't believe that a career in farming and food-related businesses cannot be achieved without owning land. While many more would like to know how to enter our industry, the perception that owning land has to be a prerequisite does make us look very, very insular. What is very relevant too, and particularly here at Groundswell, is that most young people lack awareness about what our sector is doing in its commitment to more sustainable farming and the role it plays in wider environmental sustainability. However, when you get close to them and when you explain through experiential learning, then they quickly understand, they get it very quickly. And I think, Paul, you'll be heartened to know that 87% of young people believe soil is the essential factor in sustainable food production. The research also looked at the next generation's aspiration to be conscious consumers. And 80% wanted to learn more about sustainable food choices. And a similar percentage stated that with clear environmental sustainability, that would be their number one choice over cost, price, and convenience. That's quite remarkable. So I think the evidence is clear. We have the opportunity to empower the next generation. They have some knowledge and definite interest, but we need to give them the tools to critically analyze and to have access to experiential learning, where they can foster a greater understanding, value, and trust in our industry. When you're taking young people out of city homes and exposing them to the diversity of what we do as food producers, it clearly changes their opinions of us. They understand the importance of science and innovation in underpinning our future. They appreciate the range of careers available and understand it's not just limited to being a farmer. They understand our food supply chain is complex and has very many different components. They're interested and fascinated, actually, where their food comes from and how it's sourced. And when you ask them, what would you tell someone who knew nothing about the industry, about what it's like? They say, well, it's the backbone of our society. It's a really big industry, and it's nothing like the stereotypes that many of us imagine. So I think from a Leaf perspective, we took away from that 5 essential actions. The first is we have to offer much more experiential learning to provide practical insights to different career options. We need to give clear guidance on how to place school subjects at the forefront of links to agriculture-related careers. We need to ask industry professionals, agricultural colleges and apprentices to talk directly to young people. We need to engage with them and share their experiences and knowledge and develop a sixth-form program for different industry placements. Maybe that's a few days, maybe it's a weekend, maybe it's in the school holidays. But that's going to give those essential touch points. And finally, offering training and CPD to teachers to support them in giving the children the right information. So, as Paul says, Leaf is a catalyst for change. And while we are increasing our resources substantively, we cannot do this alone. We've worked with over 28,000 young people so far this year. Last year, we touched over 700,000 people with our programs. But now is the time for each and everyone that's involved in this wonderful industry to recognize the scale of this challenge and work collaboratively. We need to develop an ambitious plan of engagement, information, and promotion to inspire the next generation. And while we see when young children first come out onto farms, that wow factor, the first time they touch the animal, the first time they see open fields, some of this is very alien to them. While that creates that wow factor, it doesn't create a long-term commitment and behavior change. And what we know is that we need educational specialists working in schools to actually make that happen. So that's all I'm going to say. Now I hope that sort of set the scene. I think there's an enormous challenge. Young people want to know more, and somehow we have to give them that experience. So what I want to do now is invite the panelists to come and join me. And we have a variety of people. Please come on from the stage. So we're going to have 2 groups. So we've got 3 young people who've entered the industry quite recently. And then we have farmers who deal and deliver experiential learning, Andy and John, which I'll come and introduce in a minute. And David, of course, our CEO, who has a much greater understanding of the wider supply chain. So we're going to focus initially on young people coming into the industry. And I'll just introduce them. Daisy Wood from Leaf. Daisy grew up on a family farm in South Gloucestershire, and now you work on our project work, and you're very deeply committed to sustainable food production. I'll come on to a question in a minute. Ed, you got the bug from your father-in-law, who was a herdsman down in the southwest, and now Ed has a council farm near Gorran in Cornwall, and you have a sheep enterprise running successfully down there. And Amy, you passed a degree in business management and joined the Dyson Summer Series last year, and now you're working for Dyson Farming on the commercial team. So I'm going to ask Amy the first question. So what was the driver for joining the Dyson Summer Series? What made you do that?
So I went to the University of Leicester, and I studied a non-agricultural degree. So I did business management, and I'm from a non-farming background. So I was always interested in agriculture. My grandpa used to take me to Melbourne Market every single Tuesday to go see the cattle and the sheep. But again, like you said at the beginning, with being 16 or 17, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kept my options open. And it was only when I got through my degree and I had to pick a dissertation that I chose to study a bit more into agriculture. And I remember very briefly sitting in a university hall, and the people behind me said they were going to take their friend to go to their local farm to see a chicken because they didn't know what a live chicken looked like. So I went, right, okay, I've gone to a Leicester university. They don't really know that much about agriculture, and I want to do a dissertation on something that's completely different. So let's do an agricultural dissertation. So I did that, and I loved it so much. If I could do that every single day for the rest of my life, I would. I thought, it's too late. I've finished 10,000 words. What do I do now? And I kind of felt like I'd missed the boat. I hadn't gone to an agricultural university. I hadn't got any experience. So I was looking for every single option that I could possibly find. And then I just happened to stumble across Dyson Farming Summer Series on LinkedIn. I thought, give it a go, see if I apply and see if I can go onto it. And then I applied for the Summer Series, and one thing led to another, and I did the week. And I remember sitting in my car about to go home, and I was like, I really don't want to go home. I just don't want to leave. So I really cheeky made the comment as I was leaving, please consider me in the future for any opportunities that you think might be worth my time. They contacted me the week after to offer me a job. So.
That's a terrific story. We'll come back to it in a minute. Ed, so you made a real change. So what do you when you decided to go into farming, what did your peer group think of what you were about to do?
Well, my father's an electronic engineer, and my mum was a civil servant, and it was all a bit, I think they would have liked me to go to university and sort of maybe follow my dad's footsteps. But I was always an outdoors sort of boy growing up. When I did A-levels, I originally wanted to be a large animal vet, but I was a bit preoccupied with rugby, and A-levels sort of fizzled out. So did a national diploma in agriculture to sort of continue, sort of thought I'd be a herdsman or sort of the likes, still working large animals. So yeah, did my diploma, worked on various farms, different systems, dairy, beef, sheep, sort of got to the stage where I'd sort of homed in on shepherding sheep. That was what I wanted to do, and with our wedding money, me and my wife bought our first sheep, and yeah, sort of 6 years down the line, we're sort of about class ourselves as an established sheep farm, and yeah, looking to go. And I think parents and everybody's behind us now, but at first it was a bit of a drastic sort of not disappointment for them, but a bit of a shock to the system.
And did the local farming community help you? Have they been supportive?
Oh, it's brilliant. Like it's a daunting sort of industry to get into. You're starting off, you're spending as much money as you can on stock, things like that. Obviously, you want to stock the ground you're renting. And then things like machinery and tools, and you sort of it's a bit mind-boggling. But the farmers around me, my boss is here. I shepherd off farm full time still, basically, and like the support from people around me like that, just lending stuff, information, being on the end of the phone, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's been good.
And Daisy, let's come to you. So you're involved in lots of projects at Leaf. Within your peer group, do you think young people really care about where their food comes from and how it's produced?
Yeah, it's a good question and a tricky question. Generally, I think that young people do care about food production and where their food comes from, but I very much think it depends on your background and your upbringing and what you have been exposed to. So I grew up I'm fourth generation on an arable farm, and I have grown up in the agricultural world, but I went to school in inner city Bristol and had lots of friends who have no idea about farming or food production, and like you said, may not have seen a live chicken. And actually, I think the important thing for us to do as an industry, and I expect we're all aware of this in the room, but is to really try and talk about what we're doing and promote what we're doing and just expose young people to food production and the positive things that we're doing, but also perhaps the realities and things that we may want to change in the future. I think young people do care about food production. It's just about how we expose them to even know about it in the first place.
Okay. So for all three of you, what can we do that's going to encourage more people to just think about this possibility? There are lots of misconceptions, aren't there, about farming? How do we change it? Do you think we're on the right track with what we're doing in Leaf Education? Do you think there's other things that we could do from your perspective? You going to go, Amy? Go on.
I think that we need to try and expose the younger generations to the industry as much as possible, but also make them aware of the opportunities that they can take. I obviously did show a very strong interest into agriculture, but trying to find the platforms as to where I could get experience or I could learn from people on the ground, I did find incredibly difficult. So having a place where people can go to say, okay, you can have a work experience week here, or you can come see what we're doing in this area, and have that widespread diversity of what farms are doing and the opportunities and the job descriptions that are going would help.
I think I grew up obviously in Cornwall, quite a rural farming community really, and even at my primary school, secondary school, there was very little involvement into agriculture and the likes. And so schools and education, I feel, should be doing more to embrace it and engage with the youngsters. And like, as a youngster, if you think about farming, you might just think, oh, a chap sat in his tractor, or someone in the field with a dog and some sheep. But there's so much more in our industry, like all the sciences, the soil, the seeds. There's so much more than literally being stood in the field to be in the agricultural industry and food production.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think when young people and probably adults as well imagine the agricultural industry, they imagine a male farmer, and that's as far as their imagination goes. And actually, it's such a broad industry, and there's so many different opportunities. I have a women in food and agriculture mentor who works in IT, and she works for a feed company, doesn't have any necessarily background in agriculture, but can still be involved in our industry. And I think that's a big misconception that we need to talk about and raise awareness of, and expose young people to seeing other options, and also being able to link farming and agriculture with the word sustainability or regenerative or environmentally sensitive farming, and actually making that connection. I think schools talk a lot about sustainability, and like you said, not necessarily enough about the agri-food industry, and actually that could be a really nice way to link in the good work that we're all doing to try and drive our industry towards a more sustainable direction, and linking that into schools is a nice word that children recognise as sustainability. So.
Well, that's great. So I think what we'll do now, we're going to move down to the farmers and David, and let me just introduce them. So Andy's sitting next to Daisy there. Andy's a leaf demonstration farmer, a Newhouse Farm, Hampshire. And we launched that, I think, in 22.
Yep.
Indeed.
22.
And Andy was part of our Resilient and Ready program, and I think you found that enormously beneficial. And I do know that education is at the very heart of everything you do on your farm. So Andy, you tell us a little bit about the journey you've made in teaching people and how, the difference you've made and how perhaps some of the challenges you faced.
So it's very difficult to sort of sing one's own praises, but so when I started with Leaf, we had no kind of public interaction, no school visits at the farm, and gradually, so over the years, we've done more and more of that through Open Farm Sunday, and now we have about, not a huge amount, 5 or 6 school visits a year. We had one on Monday, just gone, 30 school kids from the local primary school, and actually it's fantastic, and it's so easy for us to do as farmers. We work very closely with Leaf Education. They sort of make sure everything's in place for us. No one's going to get hurt, no one's going to die, which is really important. So all we have to do is provide the facilities and have a great time. And as Philip said earlier, some of the kids, all they want to do is just run around. I mean, some of them are really quite daunted by the open space initially, and it's quite heartwarming when you see them and at the end of the day and they're just running around having a great time. Quite often I'll take them through the fields, I'll walk them through the tram lines, and we get halfway through the field and they're making lots of noise and excited, and I just make them stop. We just stop and we just listen. And they say, "What are we listening for?" "Well, you tell me, what can you hear?" And we can hear the birds, we can hear the insect, well, not kind of the insects, but you can hear the sort of wildlife around us, and it's those little things, those moments are really precious to me, and hopefully they'll be precious to them. And I think as farmers we can do so much more of that, especially at that little level, that young level. We always talk about we've got some pigs on the farm. We've got a few Gloucester Old Spot pigs, mainly for the school visits and the interaction. And they come and they look at the pigs and they look at them wandering around outside and they love them. And I say, "Well, how many sausages do you think you can get from that pig?" And I say 500. And they go, "Wow." And they're not fazed by it at all. And I think that's the really, really great thing. We're quite scared of that, of kind of, sort of scaring them. But I think we have to just embrace it and go with it. And I think that's so important.
And do you think they get sustainable food production? Our research alluded to the fact that they do when you explain it. Do you think they understand it?
I think they do. I think, yeah, if you can, going back to my pig analogy, I think if you can look at the pig and talk about that, I think all of a sudden it kind of clicks, and it's going to be a slow process. The other end of that is Open Farm Sunday, when you're looking at, you've got a load of children sat in front of you and you're talking about the different crops that you grow, and you look up and the parents are there as well, and they're all kind of learning as well and nodding, and you think, actually, that's really important, that kind of next level. And I think that sustainability is kind of as important for the parents as it is for the kids.
Oh, thanks, Andy. I'm going to move to John next. John, you farm on the outskirts of Birmingham, but you've been educating young people for a very long time, and I'm sure you've got some very interesting stories, but tell us about some of the initial challenges and worries you had about how you approached it and what you told them.
Yeah, we farm in a very interesting spot. So it's city one way and countryside the other way, and we're right on that very edge. So we're very close to a lot of people. And that's very exciting. Of course, when you're dealing with people, you get the two extremes. We get our fly tipping and vandalism and all those things, but most of the people, most of the time, are respectful, interested, really want to learn about farming, whether it's people who are just walking across the footpaths or whether it's school kids coming in. They're very interested, and it's just terrific to see the countryside through the eyes of a child, and particularly the children who have come out of central Birmingham, many of whom have never seen a sheep before, never been close to an animal, never even been in a field. And it's just so exciting to introduce them and then just listen for those few comments they make just as they're getting back on the coach. "That was the best day ever. I want to be a farmer," looking for those lovely statements as they go.
So what were your initial worries? Were you worried about how you were going to do it when you first started?
I think the only concerns was I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this. And having done a CVAS course with what was then FACE education and has now become LEAF education, that inspiration from a group like LEAF and that encouragement and working together, that goes on. That's what's really allayed those fears. In somebody somewhere knows how and can give us the advice and help. And that's been great to work with them.
And a question really for both you and Andy. So young children in the sort of 13, 14, 15, but then you get to the older ones who are probably have slightly more misconceptions. How do you deal with the older ones who perhaps maybe a little bit more difficult to change their approach? How do you deal with those?
Young people are people, whatever age. They can express an interest, and it's just about engaging with them on their level. And what I have found is that to start from where they're at. So, what did you have for breakfast today? There's a good start. Rather than saying, well, we farmers, we plant the seed, we don't, so you start where they're at and you work backwards. Whatever the age, I don't really distinguish that level of interest. Obviously, the level of education is important, and you just go with that. But I work with any age, and they're all fun.
Okay, so let's move to David. So David, your career spanned from working with Jordan's and the Jordan's Farm Partnership to head of sustainability for ABF. So you've seen a much wider spectrum within the supply chain. How do you see us connecting with young people?
Thanks very much, Philip. I mean, I just think the opportunities now, I mean, and I think Groundswell evidences this, it's just a transformational changes taking place. And I interestingly, as I reflected on the questions here, I don't think it's about just young people feeling that the farm gate was an impenetrable environment to enter. I think actually a lot of people, even within the food industry, felt that, they were disconnected from the supply chains. And I think that actually that is genuinely starting to shift in a really, really big way. And that presents enormous opportunities for us to talk to industry about how the food industry then engages people to create new career opportunities to come into food, agriculture, all of the massive range of diverse careers which exist within food and agriculture. It's such a stimulating, exciting place. And I have to say, if I went back to the early stages, if you asked me when I was 15, will I build my future career in the food industry, I probably would have said no. I mean, I was working in a feed and flour mill at the time. I never envisaged that my whole career was going to be here. But there's such a diverse range of opportunities there to sort of create a really flourishing career and increasingly to connect with actually the grassroots of where your food actually comes from. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
So much greater collaboration across the industry. And we're beginning to see that, aren't we? I mean, we're beginning to see retailers come out to some of these events and some of our events to learn more.
Yes.
So I think
only this morning I was talking to an agronomist who's going to work for a major food producer. I mean, I think that this transformation of actually the food industry being much more interested in having the skills of the actual farm level production embedded within the further up the system. I mean, this is a really big shift, and I think something we should be embracing. And organisations like LEAF really want to encourage that transition and encourage young people to see a future for their careers, and that future being really stimulating and exciting.
And I alluded to the fact that at LEAF we're obviously increasing our numbers in educational specialists. Could you say a little bit about what we're doing and how we're going about that, David? Because I think that's really pertinent.
Absolutely, yes. So we've now got across. We have an education and public engagement team, which includes approximately 19 people in it now. Many of those people, actually, some of them are sat in this room with us today, are themselves qualified teachers. It's led by Carl Edwards, who's sadly not with us today, but Carl is a former deputy head teacher himself, has huge expertise in the process of educational and educational explanation. We're forming really key strategic partnerships now with other organisations such as the AHDB, who have a real interest in driving understanding of sustainable food and farming production, and we're then forging partnerships with schools to bring that to life. So last year we took about over 38,000 children and young people out into farm environments, engage with them in classrooms around farming and sustainability. So having a real impact and trying to really bridge that connectivity, make the farm gate seem less impenetrable and more of a place which is sort of aspirational and somewhere where you belong. Yeah.
And John, you mentioned CVAS. Can you just explain to the audience CVAS and why it's important?
I can't tell you what it stands for. I always forget. But this is a basic, simple training for farmers to understand how to relate to children and how to deliver a school visit. I have to say, I did my course a long time ago, but the thing that that really grabbed me was the enthusiasm and that encouragement. John, you can do this. You can use your farm. And there are many ways of doing that, but it was really that encouragement and support, and to be able to ring somebody up and say, hey, what do I do here? And to have a voice at the other end that is encouraging and supporting.
That's good. I'm conscious of time, and I want to allow the audience to ask questions as well. So now is the opportunity. Your Royal Highness.
Thank you. Knew I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity. Thank you all very much indeed. There's lots that I wanted to say, but I'm not allowed to say. I would have been up on the panel, but unfortunately we've got a small thing called an election coming up, so I've got to mind my P's and Q's. But actually I wanted to ask a question. So we talk about taking young people out onto farms, and we're brilliant at the younger age range, and we're trying to do more and more in the middle age range, because that's really where we want to have the pull through, and ultimately into the older age range. And we want to be able to influence all of the good things in what they learn, how they learn it. But I wonder, whilst getting young people out onto farms, that's only one part of it. I talk about food production rather than necessarily agriculture, because agriculture is only one part of it. Food production has a multiple numbers of jobs, opportunities, aspirations. How do we fill the gap? And actually, David, you're probably the one to answer this, having worked with Jordan's and ABF. How do we fill the gap as to what happens from an agricultural perspective on the farms, where I think there's an awful lot of really good work being done, but how do we fill the next part of the chain, so to encourage that pull-through for a greater understanding of what happens after the raw produce has left the farm gate, and it then starts down the road until they see it on the shop floor?
Thanks very much indeed for the question. And I think it's a very, very well-made point, because I think actually generally understanding of the career opportunities within food production are very limited, and many people would simply see those as being quite functional roles, and actually that is absolutely not the case. I mean, food science, food technology, the engineering. I remember talking to a very, very highly qualified engineer who'd come out of the aerospace industry and then was working producing granola, which sounds ridiculous. But he was saying to me, actually, in the aerospace industry, all of the parts I'm manufacturing conform to one exact size. And when I'm making whole foods, they don't. It's complicated. And this is really sophisticated work. And so I think this point about how do we reach out to people, how do we create a sense of excitement around these careers is absolutely critical. Now, I think what is very exciting to me at the moment is there's a much greater understanding of the sort of provenance links of the agricultural to the food production piece is starting to come through. So we've got brands emerging, more and more brands. It started with very few, like maybe Jordan Cereals being a good example. And I know Anne Sawbridge, the managing director of Jordan Cereals, is in the audience here today as well. But now there are increasingly more and more organisations linking this primary production to the secondary, tertiary production, having these conversations around the careers. And I think, Wild Farms being a good idea. And I can see Harriet's here from Wild Farms as well. This making these links through to where is food coming from? How does that then turn into vibrant, exciting, stimulating businesses? And I think it's fundamentally this vibrant, exciting, stimulating business is probably the flagpole which will pull interest in. And I suspect it's probably only once you get behind the curtain that you then start to say, oh, this is actually much more going on here than I previously had realised. So I think there are a number of different actors who are making this happen and creating this sort of interest in food as a concept. Organic, I think, is another very, very important mark in terms of stimulating interest in where is food coming from. But I think fundamentally it's the stimulus of interest around the brand which will bring people in. And once people get in behind the brand, it's only then that the full myriad of careers will open up to them. But I know the whole industry has struggled a little bit, really, to sort of take it away from being hairnets and beard snoods and all the rest of it to making it much more of a, actually, this is really sophisticated, complicated, and engaging work.
And just to add to that, as a young person, when I was looking at degrees and what I do next, I was really keen to find a degree apprenticeship or internships or something within the food production industry, not necessarily just agriculture. And it may well have changed in the few years, but I couldn't quite find anything that ticked that box that I wanted to do. And so I'm really keen to see that change in the future, and we start to get degree apprenticeships and maybe virtual work experiences where that makes it easier from a health and safety point of view too, and young people then don't have to try and travel far distances, and it just helps get that exposure. So yeah, hopefully that's something that really starts to come out as the food production industry starts to open their doors too.
Thank you very much for your presentations. It's good to hear real voices. I suppose I'm interested in the converse. So have you found that being around young people on your farm has had an influence on the way you farm? I was at COP conference in Glasgow, and I was fortunate enough to be with a group of Indigenous people who could not believe that there were no children at the COP conference, that decisions of that magnitude about the future could be taken without the children's voice. And so I wonder if it sort of pushed your sustainability or regenerative practice, in a sense, being mirrored by the people who are inheriting this land.
Profoundly affected, yes. Whether it's grandchildren or visiting children from schools, it's all part and parcel. And to actually see the farm through the eyes of visitors is incredibly helpful. What they observe, the feedback. We're running the farm on regenerative lines, and just the fact that I have to explain that to people who don't necessarily understand it is helpful to me as well. And the discovering of soil life, the sorts of statistics we need to turn out, how many worms in a field, how many microorganisms in a handful of soil, all of these things, it encourages me as well. So yes, it's all connected, it's all joined up, and very helpful, and part of our story, part of the development.
Yeah, and also sometimes the simplest question can, as you say, just trigger something, and someone will ask you, well, why are you doing that? Well, actually, I don't know why I'm doing that. And so it just sets you thinking, doesn't it? So actually, you're right. It's.
Thank you. I'm John T. Brunye. I speak to you as a farmer and an educator, but also as the co-founder of Emergent Generation, which is a network for young agroecologists and regenerative farmers. We've got 500 members, and the key for me is food systems, not food production. We've got to go all the way through the chain and round again and involve everything that we see here at Groundswell. So we've got members that are farmers, growers, soil experts, agronomists, buyers for Waitrose and Sainsbury's. We've got artists, we've got geographers, we've got researchers, and many, many more. But Philip, you mentioned collaboration. And this is the question. How do we collaborate? Because there's quite a few networks, whether it's young farmers, whether it's demonstration farms like Farm Ed and Leaf, and yeah, there's many, many more. So how do we collaborate to bring this food system education piece together?
Yes, no, I think that's a really good question, and I think number one, I think collaboration requires an anchor point of trust, and I think that bringing together various different organisations in pursuit of a common objective. And I think the other point, and this I would take this from my industry experience in terms of how to facilitate change. I think it's also about empowerment, and it's recognizing that not everybody is going to go on that journey of collaboration in the same way, and that's okay. The end point is what we're aiming for, but I think it's recognizing the different functions that different organizations can bring together, because there's some amazing organizations, Farms for City Children's, Country Trust, etc., who are doing very similar work around trying to engage young people and get them out there. What we're seeking to achieve is complementary to one another. The Leaf work and the Leaf team who are here today, many of them are directly from an education background, and we try to anchor the educational delivery work that we deliver back to the curriculum. So that's our function. But I think it's being very open, bringing people together, and then frankly trying to avoid talking shops. Because I think that's the other thing. We have lots of meetings about how we're going to collaborate, and actually we don't get on with the job of delivering the outputs which are actually serving the function. So, I mean, I think one of the things which I do think is so wonderful about Leaf, and why I was so keen to join the organisation, which Caroline built up, is because I think she recognised this need to create a convening force that allowed for lots of organisations to come together that have different fundamental objectives, but are serving this higher purpose of trying to bring environmental considerations much closer into farming systems. So I hope that sort of goes towards the work side. And I'll be very interested to find out more about your work. We'll pick up afterwards. Great, thank you.
Thank you. As an employer within the wider food supply chain, frontier agriculture, really interested in Amy's comment about having a mentor and how you were connected with your mentor in the industry, because we have a responsibility to play, and that's a role we're not providing today, but I'd be really keen to understand how we could get involved.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, elaborate a bit more. So do you want to know more about the mentorship scheme? Or?
Yes, so how you were connected with somebody who could be a mentor. If across the frontier agriculture workforce, we've got people from all different backgrounds, all different types of role that could provide mentoring to other people like yourself.
Okay, so I have only just begun on my journey as a mentee, but it's an organisation called Women in Food and Farming, Food and Agriculture, sorry, and I just applied through the scheme to become a mentor, a mentee, and I believe that's how mentors do it as well, and I think it's a great opportunity. I know me and lots of my colleagues jumped at the chance to be put in contact with someone within the industry, especially a woman in my position, to see a woman in that position where I might want to get to. I recommend everyone signing up to be a mentor or a mentee. It's great. And I'm also part of Emergent Generation, so I'll talk to Jonty afterwards.
I suppose for me, after my diploma, I worked for several different farms on a self-employed basis. So I suppose I learnt a lot and was shown a lot as a mentor, sort of from where I worked, but not directly as a specific. Here's how you do it.
Thank you very much. I, like many people, have been totally inspired by the range of speakers at Groundswell over the last couple of days. But I'm not aware of many groups of young students or young people of school age being here. And I'm also, I don't know, but I can't imagine there's many careers advisors here. I think what we miss out is we don't actually get to the right level in schools and everything else and tell people that there is this opportunity out there. And I'm sure that thousands of people, if they're children, if they're able to come here and hear some of the talk, some of the people here, they would be inspired into agriculture. And so the question I'm asking is how do we get the careers advice and get people to come to face with events like this, where you can be totally inspired by some of the speakers and you really see that actually there's some fantastic technology here, there's some inspirational speakers, and if I was 50 years younger, I would probably be thinking, wow, this is going to be a fantastic place to get a job. This is where I want to be in this sector. But I wasn't. I was sitting in some dusty old classroom learning trigonometry, which bored me to hell.
I think it's an amazing question. I had the same thought actually, because I've got children who are in their teenage years, and they're currently doing their mock GCSEs right now. But I did think actually they would love to see some of the stuff which is going on here. I do think there's a cultural shift which is interesting in our society. When I was young, there were many more jobs in agriculture, and it was a much more you could sense that was part of the world in which I'd grown up. Though I grew up in a village in Cambridgeshire, not far from here, and you could sense that was a possibility. And now I think it's a little bit more remote. And I think events like this bring the farming community together. I mean, I feel more connected here to other people from agricultural backgrounds and agricultural interests than I felt. It really is an inspirational event. And I do think if there is a capacity, and maybe this is a conversation, Paul Harriott, we could have for next year through Leaf Education, to do something where we deliberately try and get some more young people here. I completely agree with you. I think it's completely inspirational and could have a really significant impact on encouraging young people through.
Oh, gosh, last one. No pressure then. I'm Andy Guy. I'm an ex-Leaf demonstration farmer and used to host school visits quite a lot in times gone by. There's a lot of things that stop school visits taking place on farms, I think. One of them is money, and that applies to both the farmer. The farmer's time is really important, and particularly for farmers like Ed, I think, who's kind of at the beginning of his career. I expect his time is full up looking after sheep, whether they're his own or somebody else's. So compensation for the farmer's time, I think, is important. But the other cost that's a real block, I think, for a lot of schools is hiring buses and getting in extra teaching assistants and that sort of thing to help. And I wonder whether the panel has any opinions about, first of all, whether we can get more money out of government. I know this week's perhaps not the time to mention that. But maybe some of the industry and other players in the food chain could help. And I wonder what the panel thinks could be done about that.
Yeah, you're right about the buses, Andy. I mean, the visit we had this week, they came only about 5 miles on 2 buses, and it was 700 quid. I mean, it's ridiculous. When that was mentioned, we're part of a fairly newly formed cluster group, and I do wonder whether, as a cluster group, we could do something to maybe fund some of these visits. I don't know how, or some kind of sponsorship or something, but I think that is stopping a lot of people coming out to farms for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The transport is the big issue, and it's getting worse. It's getting more and more difficult. I've had schools cancel this year simply because they could not get the transport. Schools being quoted over £1,000 to get to the farm, and that's just a few miles away. So yes, there is a need, and perhaps we need to be talking to some of the big industries to say, will you fund this school for this day, for this visit? Farmers' time, not a problem. We just keep working. Just put in the hours. But it's the transport issue.
Sorry, me again. What you said about bringing young people out here is absolutely critical. I'm patron of the ASAO, which covers all of the agricultural shows right way around the country. And one of the big problems we have is we've got still a number of small children coming from the primary sector, but it's almost impossible to get them coming from the secondary sector for all the reasons that you're talking about. But also we have another fundamental problem. We've got we're trying to cover off 3 different areas. We're trying to cover off the area of agriculture. We're then covering across another area which is education, and we're covering off another area which is business and industry. So we're actually in 3 different areas, separate political areas as well. So to try and get the support across, who do we go to? Do we go to the Department of Education? Do we go to Department of Agriculture? Or do we actually go to Department of Education? And I think this is part of the issue. It's falling between 3 stools, and no one takes necessarily absolute responsibility for it. I don't think there's any question that getting young people, once you get them out of the classroom, and certainly getting them here, they would absolutely lap it up. Although I have to tell you, I had a very funny experience with a group of young people at the National Fruit Show. And they were going around, had some VR that they were looking at apples, and they were working out pH value, all the rest of it. And I went up to them and I said to these young guys, what is your interest? Now, one of them wanted to go into some kind of engineering and another wanted to go into robotics. I read that as basically creating the next games. So I said, well, actually, you'd be amazed how much engineering, robotics, and technology goes into farming these days, into food production, whether it be actually land-produced food, or you're talking about machinery or anything else. And they looked at me as if I was completely bonkers. I mean, I couldn't possibly be talking seriously that there was anything technologically interesting about farming. But actually, I said, go round, have a look at the robotics, have a look at all of these different machines here, and you will be amazed. They're, especially with the driverless machines and everything, and all of the drone technology and all of the other technologies. But again, it's falling between 3 stools. And I think until we can bring all of those actors together, we're going to really struggle to get the education that we need in the classroom, and also get the pull through to get kids out of the classroom. I don't think there's any lack of desire from this side of the fence. But it's actually, who do we talk to and how do we get better at making that happen? Because once they've actually come out, then how do we create the pull-through? And if we're actually looking towards jobs at the end of the day, which is what we really want them to be interested in, then we need to be talking to another department. Anyway, I'm just saying it is complicated. and money for buses is only one part of the problem.
So I think we're going to have draw the session to a close. We've slightly overrun, Paul, I'm sorry. But thank you all for your participation. I think what is illustrated is the scale of the challenge. There is so much to do, and yet there's all this latent talent that we could get interested in our wonderful industry. So let's go away thinking about how we can each support and develop and work with each other to develop a better future for us. Thank you. I'm going to first just thank all our panelists. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. And I thought I'd finish with a simple thought from a young person's perspective, which would be, you cannot be what you cannot see, but you also cannot change what you don't understand. Just think about that. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Your Royal Highness, for being here.